time to discuss it and have a more thoughtful plan, procedures, criteria, contingency plan.
Do you need a health code? Do you need something like a health code then? Do you need to have people, have you have a health passport valid for however long and you have to do an official test and so on, as on the mainland? Is that the way to go?
Well, I think you do need a health code.
You do, yeah.
It's just a medical certificate to ensure that you have done the test within whatever time, within, in the past 3 days, before your departure. And also when you arrive in the other country or vice versa, then upon your arrival, you also taking another test. I think that may be the way to go rather than using health code. Because a lot of problem people, they're not confident on the health code to worry about their personal data being used for other areas.
Would you have some kind of situation that happens before that where like people fill in their wrong details where it's untraceable? So how can we tackle on that?
That's what I said at the very beginning. How to trace it? Not only when they're in Hong Kong, but also if they're in Hong Kongers, if they, let's say, go to Thailand, if there's any issues over there, then how do they bring them home? That's also another thing. And also the other thing is your medical system. Are we able to handle if, let's say, people from, let's say, Thailand again, if they have a large number of people being tested positive while they're in Hong Kong, and do we have the medical facilities to deal with all that?
I mean, how much of a priority should this be now as well? I mean, what we've learned, I think, really from the community testing is that there is very, very little, very, very few cases, asymptomatic cases in the community, and that when we get increases, they come from outside, and it's people coming. It's not, in Hong Kong, it's from outside that causes the trouble. And so if we start opening our borders and exchanging things, that's a recipe for problems.
Yeah, I think it's the number one priority. If you're going to start doing the travel bubbles, I mean, we really need to look at these issues and what is our contingency plan if that happened. Particularly, not only talking about the medical system, but also you think about it. Bring in Hong Kong and it starts spreading around again. And the first thing is going to happen is stop the restaurant again. At the evening, everything's going to stop the schooling, and a lot of angry parents stay home and do the Zoom meeting, and also work from home again. So you can imagine what kind of chaos if that spreads widely again in Hong Kong. So it's a very caution approach towards this issue.
So a bi-stage approach, do you think would be better? Say, like, you try it on with Macau and China first, and then try to use that as a proof to say we are okay to discuss with other countries?
Yeah, I think we can take, one or two places, not 11 at the start with. That's for sure.
Just having that discussion will become complicated. So it's not going to happen with, like, 11 countries saying okay at the same time. So.
No, I don't think so. But if you look at Australia and New Zealand was trying to doing it, a few months back, but they got pretty much everything ready, and they suspended because the cases in Australia all of a sudden increased quite a fair bit. So they stopped it. Even in Europe, they were trying to do it, but in a much smaller scale. That is what's going on in other places in the world. So I think eventually it has to happen. Okay, you just cannot lock down the city or other countries like that. Indefinitely, you cannot do that. I can understand why they start thinking about it, which is fine. bringing more consideration rather than just economy needs. As I said, what if that spread again? Or how you do it, or how about the numbers of people? How many flights per day? It has to be done in a small scale and start with.
Okay.
It must have a good, contingency plan.
Okay, so start small and develop. Jeremy Tan, thank you very much indeed for joining us, Civic Party lawmaker and former airline pilot himself. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. 17 minutes past 9 finally today. As mentioned, we wanted to return to the topic of the separation of powers causing controversy, and in particular to an article written by the Secretary for Justice, Theresa Cheng, published recently in the South China Morning Post. Separation of powers has no place in Hong Kong's political structure, was the headline and the message. For comment, we're joined now by Professor Johannes Chan, Chair of Public Law, former Dean of the Faculty of Law at the University of Hong Kong. We've got a few emails on this topic. Let's maybe just start with one from Bowen, who says, "Dear Backchat, there is no need for the current debate to be shrouded in esoteric mystery. What Theresa Cheng has not addressed in her article in the South China Morning Post is why people find it necessary to talk about the concept of separation of powers in Hong Kong. People respond so seriously to the authorities' assertion that there is no separation of powers in Hong Kong because they know there really is no separation of powers in the PRC, and the consequent totalitarian governance is there for everyone to see. But Hong Kong has officially been promised one country, two systems. In Hong Kong, although separation of powers is far from absolute, as reflected in LegCo's setup and the dominance of MPCSC interpretations, the three branches are expected to perform their functions independently and be seen to base their decisions, at least as far as domestic matters are concerned, on their truthful evaluation of the public good. Whether they actually do that or not needs to be judged based on the system of transparency, which is facilitated by the court's open judgments, LegCo's open debate, votes, and so on. What the officials recently said is tantamount to a denial of the very foundation on which Hong Kongers have enjoyed a certain degree of transparency and accountability, limited as it is. The fear is that given a complete denial of any separation of powers, as compounded by executive interference in the assignment of judges to specific cases, all independent judgment and dissent is officially disallowed, and even the court's open judgments will not mean anything in future, because judges will be obligated to toe the party line and supply judgments which are merely a smokescreen veiling the real political intentions behind. The ultimate dreaded scenario is that every single individual working in all three branches will talk and act like the principal officials of the executive branch. Officials like Theresa Cheng need to answer this question, given that the type of separation of powers insisted on by Hong Kongers is only one that is as limited, incomplete, and inconclusive in terms of political outcomes as described. Still so adamantly opposed to it. That comes from Bowen. Thanks so much indeed for that. Backchat.hk.hk. Mr. Chan, good morning to you.
Morning.
Let's start with that point by Bowen. Why is the administration so adamantly opposed to the idea of separation of powers in Hong Kong?
Right. I think Owen's comment actually said it all. I can't see any substance in it because, of course, there are more than one version of separation of power. The exact separation varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but then the essence of it basically is there are checks and balances with an independent judiciary. So, and although they said there's no separation of power, it seems to be a matter of form rather than substance, because they can't deny that there are different institutions. Each of the three branches, they have their own role, they have their exclusive spheres, there are checks and balances. They even admit that the judiciary is independent, the government is subject to with the monitoring of the judiciary. So it's all there. So what are they saying? My worry is the more I think about it, the more I think this is not really about separation of power. If they said there's no separation of power, what is there? They keep talking about executive-led. But if executive-led government means nothing more than the government is responsible for initiating policy, implementing policy, preparing electrical briefs, initiating bills, electrical, no one disputes that. That is squarely within separation of powers. But if you need something more, and I think that is probably the agenda, to need something more, they expect the judiciary to be compliant. They find that the judiciary is too independent. And so we have seen in the last couple of years, in particular in the recent months, the increasing attack at the judiciary. It seems that they expect the judiciary to toe the political line. I think that seems to be the agenda behind the attacking the independence of the judiciary, and that is a very cause. Hello?
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay, I think, well, what about this point about, one of the comments frequently made is that it's not, we don't have separation of powers, we have an executive-led government. Can you have both? Can you have...
Of course, you can have both, because they never really define what executive-led means, and I think the government has to explain that. And as I said, executive-led simply means that the government is responsible for initiating policy, implementing policy, the day-to-day governance. They prepare legislative bills to go to LegCo, etc. No one disputes that. That is executive-led. But if executive-led means the chief executive is above the law, if the government can do whatever they want, and the legislature as well as the judiciary are expected to be compliant institutions and to not stand in the way even when the government has transgressed the limits of the law. Now that is not our system, and that has nothing to do with executive-led system. That becomes an authoritarian government, and the government never make it clear what exactly they mean.
I think, I mean, there is a political element in this. You just, when you look at the two sides in the debate, you can see that it's split on a larger, broader sort of political lines. I guess the argument would be from the Secretary for Justice and from certainly from the Chief Executive is that all power in Hong Kong flows from the north, flows from the MPC essentially. So the way it's divided up in Hong Kong, if we talk about the separation of powers and we talk about checks and balances within Hong Kong, we're misrepresenting the situation and giving the appearance of an independence which isn't really there, because we distribute and we deal with the power in Hong Kong. As I say, ultimately it all flows from the north.
No, no one says that because of separation of power, Hong Kong has the power to deal with foreign affairs and defense. No one asserting because of separation of power, Hong Kong has a greater autonomy than it has been promised under the Basic Law. And even under the independence of the judiciary, we accept that the power of final interpretation of the Basic Law is vested in the Standing Committee of the NPC, and this interpretation is binding on Hong Kong. So no one disputes that. I think